go. It's migrating to Australia. It's summertime in Melbourne. I'm Grant Williams. I'm not the migration expert in this room. I was going to say salubrious, but it's not salubrious. It's more than adequate, though.
It's bright and airy.
It's a beautiful spot to sit on a beautiful Melbourne summer's day. Hello, Mr. David Bongiorno, Australia's favourite migration lawyer.
Graham Williams, how are you, mate? It is a beautiful, bright, breezy room, and it's a lovely Melbourne afternoon. Very rare to have a lovely Melbourne summer. We haven't had much good weather. We're inside podcasting, our final podcast for the year.
And look, do we know whether we had any good weather last summer or the summer before? Because we weren't outside enjoying it. We weren't
allowed to do anything. They hadn't been allowed to do anything the past few years. It's our second or third time together after doing it online for a year and a half.
Second
time.
It's only the second time.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe it's not. Did we do one before we had a guest? I can't remember.
Oh, yes, we did.
Yes, we did. So it's our third time getting reacquainted face to face. So there we go. Enough meaningless chit chat, David. It's always great to be face to face talking about migration. Bit of a mixed bag today, David.
Mixed bag, and it's the end of the year, and a lot of people are finishing their courses. And one of the mandatory requirements is proof of application or actual evidence of a police check, an Australian Federal Police check. So we're going to go through that. People who've listened to this Migrating to Australia podcast before will be familiar, but it's always good to have a refresher, Grant, because you'd be stunned when you found out how many people forget to apply for an Australian Federal Police check when they're applying for their 485 post-study work right visa.
I would be stunned to learn that not everybody who's listened to one episode of Migrating to Australia has not actually listened to every one of them right back from the beginning.
Oh, we've got a loyal base, and a wonderful husband-wife couple reached out to me earlier this week. We did a podcast on them, and the doors are opening up. So we might, when they come to Australia and are in sunny Queensland, we might do a hookup and have a good chat to them. But the doors are opening.
And that's a podcast interview kind of a hookup. Just in case you were wondering.
It's the end of the year. The Australian Federal Police check, though, let's kick off with that. If somebody has completed a course and they're eligible for a post-study work right 485 visa, one of the mandatory requirements is proof of application for a police check, or evidence of the actual police check itself. Now, you do it online, and I've been speaking to a lot of people this week, and there's a big misunderstanding about what you apply for. You apply for the Immigration and Citizenship Police check. You don't apply for anything else.
Okay.
Anything else is incorrect.
So it's a different police check.
Same Australian Federal Police. There's just a different category of police check.
Yeah. So it's not the police check that you need to do if your employer tells you you need to provide a police check for a job.
Not for working in hospitals. It's for immigration-citizenship.
Now, have you been through the process on the website, and is it easy to find amongst the options?
On the Australian Federal Police check, on the Australian Federal Police website, it's reasonably easy to find. You've got to enter your data. It would take a competent typist about 8 to 10 minutes, and when you've finished and paid for it, you're given an email receipt, but you're also given a grey, it's a red reference number on a grey background. So those two pieces of evidence are irrefutable proof you've applied for your visa, you've applied for your Australian Federal Police check. So the actual formal receipt for payment and the reference number, which comes in red on a grey backing, two separate communications from the AFP.
Okay, so just to make sure everyone understands exactly what they need to do is when you are clicking on the application for a police check, make sure it clearly says immigration.
Click on immigration citizenship.
If it doesn't say immigration and citizenship, keep looking through the options.
Correct.
Is it in a drop-down menu, or are there check boxes on a page? Can you remember?
A bit of both.
Okay. So
there's a couple of screens to go through. You've got to be accurate in your recollection of your addresses here, and you've got to be providing documents to show you are who you are. It's anybody who's purchased anything online or made application for something online should have no problems with it. But it's really important when you've paid for it, you get the receipt, You upload the receipt when you're applying, and you get the reference numbers also is on the receipt, but it also comes to you as a red number on a grey background.
Now,
Australian Federal Police checks must be applied for before you lodge. You must have proof you have it or that you've applied for it, because if you do not, if you lodge, what's today, Grant, the 18th?
we don't give those.
Do you know what? We could do 5 more years of podcasting, I'd still forget. If you applied on the 17th of December 2021 and you had a police check that you paid for on the 19th of December 2021, you've messed it up. Your visa will be rejected.
Now,
If you have applied on the 17th of September for your 485 post-study work right visa and your AFP receipt and the reference number on the receipt, you've got a red number, grey backing, and the receipt is dated the 15th, the receipt's dated the 15th, you've done it right. You've applied for your police check before you've lodged your application.
Now, David, just to show that we're proactive and we like to make sure we know what we're talking about, while you were just talking, I Googled AFP police check for immigration, have gone to the AFP website on my phone. So where it says police check, it says start application, and that takes you to a page where it's step 1, where you put all your personal details in, which are your standard info that everyone's going to ask you for. But then at the bottom of that page, purpose of check, it's a drop-down menu, and there are 2 options: working in the Australian Capital Territory or Commonwealth employment / immigration / visa
There it is.
/ other.
There it is. That's
And
the right
you
one.
check on that, and
Correct.
that takes you to another menu, purpose of check, and then it is,
33.
well, there are a number of options, but it includes all the working sectors where you need a police check. But as you rightly said, David, number 33, immigration / citizenship - Australia. So there's a bunch of options. 34 is law enforcement or intelligence or security. 32, immigration detention centre employment. 29, CASA, ASK. 28, care, instruction or supervision of children. So go to number 33. It's very clear for me as a native English speaker, but I don't think there can be confusion.
So people might be wondering, listening, Grant, and thinking, why are Grant and David going into the minutiae of an Australian Federal Police check? Because if it is not proven or established that you applied for it and or received it before you lodged the application, your application for a 485 will be rejected. You can take it to review, but guess what? It's a mandatory requirement at the time of application. So while you can take it to review, you'll be rejected at review.
And as I like to say, David,
Ba-ba.
or as that beautiful TV series says, computer says no.
Serious.
It was that Little Britain, wasn't it? where you go in for an interview and someone's there looking at their computer screen and you ask them a question and they just go, computer says no.
We won't segue into David Williams, very funny man that he is. Who is this? Just one quick one. Who is the politician? I'm sorry that I found myself in the bathroom of the public park at 3 a.m. What was that character's name?
I can't remember.
Very naughty show, but very funny. Wouldn't be allowed. Would it get a rerun today? Probably not.
Not on free to air.
Only
I
on
don't think.
cable.
Maybe on like one of the subsidiary channels.
And
But the point of going through that is you have to get it right.
If you get it, it's an 8 to 10 minute process. If you're slow on the keyboard, Grant did it in 2 or 3 minutes on his phone.
And if I can find the right option, I'm sorry, you can too.
And also, too, with your addresses, make sure they're accurate and correct. Look at your student visa, what you filled in for your addresses on your student visa. Add to that the addresses you've had on your 485 visa. Be consistent with everything and put that police check in. If you came to see me, I'd actually send you a copy of the link and instructions to do it so you can get it so it's foolproof. But the police check, I could go on and on about it, but I think we've done enough. It's not appellable. It can be taken to review, but you will not succeed at review. So get it right the first time.
And as I just proved, any idiot can do it.
Now, you had some news this morning. We were having coffee before. You read the papers today. What did you pick up?
Well, David, I didn't read the papers. I looked at my news feed on my phone, but there was an alert.
Sure.
There was an alert, and I don't think I've still got the notification. But the Victoria and New South Wales have waived the 72-hour isolation requirement for people arriving from overseas, provided that they do a PCR test and get a negative result. So instead of, regardless of what your result was, you can, if you're arriving next week, you would be able to see your family if they were here for Christmas. And if you were arriving the week after and you had New Year's plans, you would be okay. So, look, I just wanted to mention that in passing, because it is something that I think all the governments seem to be becoming aware of, that perhaps they need to be a little bit less rigid. On the other hand, South Australia and New South Wales numbers for new infections are going through the roof. So I would still be ultra cautious about travel, as much as we want everyone to get back here really soon. Oh, and actually, as we were talking just before we turned the go button on, I heard on BBC, again, BBC World, we're talking about the international students returning to Australia, and the discussion was there was about 42% of the previous enrolments have been lost
to the United Kingdom
over the period of the pandemic. Well, it's not a simple swap, but just by coincidence, the United Kingdom's intake of international students is up, and the numbers, they've picked up about the same percentage as we have lost. Now, those numbers are not the same, because I think we had more international students than they had anyway.
On a per capita basis, or?
Yeah, I think in general, overall, because it's a much greater proportion of our economy than international students are in Britain. But
so these young adults are looking that the visa, the education had a bonus, it had a payoff at the end, permanent residency potentially. In the United Kingdom, to the best of my understanding, somebody who studies cannot use study and subsequent work as a pathway to PR. So did they talk in the article about the fact that students are wanting a qualification over and above a qualification and PR? They're not interested in the PR. They're not interested in the PR ticket anymore.
What they were saying, as much as they can marry up who Australia has lost and that the UK has picked up, of those being the same people, it's not the people who are seeing education as a pathway to PR in Australia, but gaining international qualifications.
Recognised back home.
So those people who are coming maybe to do law and get experience in a common law jurisdiction, who are doing accounting and wanting to become chartered accountants and work for international English-speaking companies, maybe multinationals that have bases in Britain, Europe, UK, Africa, Hong Kong, Singapore, with lots of English.
Law is very popular with Malaysian students for that reason.
Those people are, if they were coming to do a Masters of Jurisprudence or something in Australia or accounting, they are preferring the UK and Canada, but this was specifically about the UK, and then they're getting their chartered qualifications in the UK rather than doing them here. So there's a lot of ground to make up. When the government said go home, a lot of people took their bat and ball and went home.
And we sympathise and understand why they've gone home and why they don't want to come back, because they were poorly treated.
And look, just slightly off topic, because it's a new project that I want to be getting going, David. I want to hear people who have been international students during this period and have made decisions either positive or negative based on the kind of attitude that Australia put out there, that the government of Australia put out there during the pandemic. So if you've got a story to tell, it's not necessarily related to migration, send me an email, grant@migratingtoaustraliapodcast.com. I'd really like to hear your story and talk to you about your story, and there's a new project coming on.
I hope, Grant, that you get lots of positive stories, because I've heard nothing but horror and very sad people leaving the country because they feel they've been let down.
Why I think it's important, again, slightly off our topic, but there's got to be consequences and things put on the public record for subsequent administrations and advisors, policymakers, to look beyond the spin and hear beyond the spin.
Listen to the stories.
What announcements and the language that people use, what it means. If you are talking to two electorates in Queensland or mining electorates in New South Wales, and you think that the language that you used was pretty clever for that, hey, we've said before, the third or fourth biggest export industry in the country, and you've torpedoed it.
Education's been blown to smithereens.
And, oh, look, moronic, you know.
And it's Australia's loss, and a lot of people are coming to understand that too late, though. They're coming to understand the input, the intellectual capital, the physical capital, the energy, the vitality and vigour and hunger. Grant, you and I have been talking on podcasts for over 2 years now, and we love international students because they bring so much vigour to the country and they make great Australians. To lose them to the United Kingdom or to lose them or to have them abandon their migration dream is sad, very sad.
And of course, we did the short-sighted thing at the start of the pandemic to save money. We cut back on the tertiary institution staff. And now, when we're going to get people back over the next 2 years, there won't be the same staff to teach them. So it's just crazy, some of the decisions that are made, thinking that everything will be fine. But hey, come back. I want you all back. I especially want all the restaurants full of people.
International students listening who are offshore and have gone to the UK, we wish you well in your studies. We miss you dearly, and the cities are not the same without you. Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, not what they used to be.
And David, I can't resist. If you made the decision to go to Canada.
Too cold.
What is it? It's about 31 degrees out here. Everyone's wearing shorts and summer dresses and T-shirts.
I've helped a number of people. I've referred a number of people to Canadian colleagues who've left Australia this past year. It's very sad. Very cold in Canada. Great country, but very cold.
So enjoy your ice fishing.
One of the things that students can get if they stay here is citizenship by conferral, as can skilled workers, partners, people who are here in Australia. So we thought we'd close the year with a bit on conferral of Australian citizenship. Now, people think that citizenship after PR is an easy process. Well, maybe not. The story is if you mess it up, you've got to start again.
Now, but there's a couple of key must-haves.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
So let's talk about what
the formula. I'll start with the formula. The formula is crucial. You've got to get your numbers right. The general residence requirement, which is Section 22 of the relevant Act, the Australian Citizenship Act. Section 22 is 4 years in Australia. You must have 4 years in Australia. You can be a temporary resident for the first 3. You can be a permanent resident for the first 3. The 4th year before you apply must be permanent residency. You cannot apply for citizenship unless your 4th year is a permanent residency year.
So,
does that make sense so far?
It does. I just want to be overly expressive. It's 4 years contiguous. It's 4 periods of 365 days in a row.
Yeah.
That you can be.
You can have days out. We'll get into that.
We'll get to that in a minute. But it's 4 years contiguous, continual, living permanently in Australia, either on temporary resident or a permanent resident.
So somebody who studies here and does a 2-year master's degree and then does a 2-year 485 and expresses interest and writes and applies for migration, when they get their year of PR, they've been here 5-6 years, they can do it. Yeah. Somebody on a working visa, somebody who's on a 482 visa, who uses the pathway of the 482 visa to get a 186 visa by temporary transition stream or direct entry stream, they can get it. You can have 4 years. 4 years in Australia. There's a common misconception out there that you have to have 4 years of PR. No, not true.
No. And the other thing I could see being an issue would be if you had, say, 3 years as a student and then you took a year to go and work somewhere using the skills that you have just gained as a student.
On a 485 visa, yeah.
No, but outside of Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And then came back and did 2 years working in Australia, you would think, well, I've done 5 years out of 6. Doesn't count.
The story is it's designed for people who spend. It's easier, whether it's designed intentionally or unintentionally. People who study here, people who come on working visas here, it's far easier because they've got a reason to be here.
You make a commitment.
You're making a commitment, and the commitment is the first 3 years, no more than 275 days outside Australia, no more than 275 in that 3 year period. In the fourth year, no more than 90. 91, but start again another year.
And remember, for most people, 90 days is a 3-month holiday.
And how many students,
Very few people,
how many working people, how many people on
how
any
many
visa
people
can
full
afford,
stop can do that?
I haven't had a 3-month holiday since university.
Gee.
And that wasn't really a 3 months. It was finish in November, it's 3 months, I suppose, yeah. So 30 years.
I've never had 3 months continual holiday.
But that's the break between uni and semester starting in the next year, isn't it? About roughly, or maybe it's 10 weeks.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know what school you went to. Well, actually, I do.
I went to Latrobe and bombed. Hello, Latrobe. I went out to Latrobe and bombed twice.
But
I also got knocked back from the University of New England.
But I just didn't know people who didn't have to work for 3 months. That's just not part of my real world experience, David.
I eventually did mature and went to RMIT, and I went to a very nice institution on the Gold Coast, Bond University, to finish my law degree in two and a bit years. The story with Latrobe, a bitter memory.
Well, I also have that. I think if you and I actually sat down and wrote down all of the institutions that we have actually enrolled in, we would probably knock off more than half of Australia's universities, I reckon.
I did a count before I matured and went to RMIT, 4 other universities, yeah. I was a late bloomer. Were you a late bloomer, Grant?
I don't know. I think I had my midlife crises at 21. But I loved just going and studying.
Oh, look, I wanted to go to the University of New England to have a rural experience, but they knocked me back. I met somebody from the University of New England recently. I said, what do you do? I said, I'm a lawyer, migration lawyer. I said, I applied to your law school and got rejected. I was 88, 89. It was a long time ago, but yeah.
I did do some residential schools as part of a horticulture course at Orange. That was lots of fun.
Nice place too.
Yeah.
No, I've got a couple of clients in Orange. It's nice. They're doctors. Beautiful part of New South Wales.
Yeah. So,
but this maths, if people are worried about the maths because they've gone back home for Christmas holidays or gone back home for mid-semester breaks or paid leave, unpaid leave, the movement records, you get your movement records from the Department of Home Affairs, and then you can do accurate mathematics to determine whether you've had, in the three years of temporary residency, no more than 275 days outside Australia, and in that 4th year PR year, no more than 90 days outside Australia. If you miscalculate and come to 91, you've got to wait another year. That 91 days gets absorbed into the 3 preceding years, and you've got to make sure there's no more than 275 days outside Australia in those 3 years. Does that make sense?
Yes. My question would be, though, David, when can you resubmit an application?
Well, you can there's a 3-month period where there's no fee. After that, you have to pay again. But it's important. The fee is, I think it's $410 or permanent residency. It's not expensive at all because permanent residency is very expensive government fees. And it's not fatal. A lot of people panic if they mess up their citizenship. As long as it's just been a mere miscalculation and nothing deceptive or misleading, missing out because you got your maths wrong, that's no tragedy. Get your maths right, your movement in and out, and do it according to the formula we've been talking about.
I'm guessing, David,
no problem.
I'm guessing that the hardest thing, the hardest bridge to cross is actually getting your permanent residency.
It is.
So
it is. And, you know, you and I have talked about the citizenship test. I've done it on a little, not Twitter, a Vine film, little highlights. You can do it in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, the test. It's not hard. The Australian citizenship test is not hard. Getting PR is challenging. Getting PR is very challenging.
I'll let you in on a secret. At the moment, I'm fishing around trying to get all of the potential questions, all the alternative questions that come up, and I'm going to make it a trivia round in my new trivia games that I'm doing, so that if you continually go and do my trivia quiz, which people can again ask me about or I'll promote next year, by doing the Australiana pack, you will get all of the questions often.
That's a great idea. And you know what? I've got to confess, I rather enjoyed doing the test because I thought, well, that's a good question. Multiple choice, and also to the translations into various languages. Read the booklet. Everything's in the booklet. It's not an ambush. Not an ambush. Every answer to every question is in the reading. And they tell you the sections to read and the sections you don't have to read. It's not like school where they'd ambush you.
So doing it as part of a trivia quiz where you can win a T-shirt will be more fun.
12 months in the 4 years is a lot of time absent from Australia. It's an incredible amount of time. And anyone who studies here or who's on a working visa here or is on a partner visa here doesn't spend 12 months or 4 years outside
Well, that was
Australia.
really the point I was making. Nobody in my orbit can afford not to be working for 3 months in a row. Correct. And anybody who is spending 12 months outside of the country after they've gained professional qualifications or have been working in an occupation that has enabled you to gain PR, then you are not going to. You are not demonstrating. No, if you're applying those skills overseas and have done so for 12 months, you have not yet made that commitment that the country is looking for to say, join us as one of us.
The story is this: you hear, and that's a manifestation of commitment. You're going through your course. You've got an eye on PR. That's a manifestation of commitment. What you've got to remember too, not to digress too much, if you're from Singapore, you can't go for citizenship unless you surrender your Singaporean citizenship. And some countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, Germany don't allow dual citizenship.
That's right. And that's the ultimate commitment.
With Singapore, apply for Australian citizenship, you have to surrender your Singaporean passport. With Germany, if you're wanting to apply for Australian citizenship, you've got to seek permission. And mostly they go, yeah. They never say nein. My only 2 words in German. But the story with Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, they don't allow it because, you've touched on it. You feel very strongly about it. Feel strongly about it.
Well, I don't feel strongly about it. Let's not miscommunicate that. I'm not against dual citizenship, but by taking out citizenship of somewhere, you are making a commitment. And what I've always said to you is I doubt that I could maintain that commitment to 2 places.
It's a good point.
I just don't know that I could ever say to myself, I am an Australian and I am also something else. Now, I'm not saying that's appropriate or inappropriate for anybody else, but my brain, I don't know that I could wave one flag on one day of the year and celebrate and wave a different flag and feel the same way on a different day.
A lot of people take out citizenship for utility. I'll give you an example. Iranian clients I've had in the past, very smart, highly skilled from Iran, become even more skilled with high-end Australian qualifications, and then go to America.
And let me say,
as Australians,
and let me say another thing. I've never been confronted with the lives other people have had where they've had to leave a place they love.
Correct.
For all sorts of reasons. So please, if you are listening and you hear me say that, I'm not making a judgment about what other people do. I've lived an extremely privileged life in Australia where I've never felt threatened for my life or my well-being. If I was an American, I might make a very different decision about how I feel about the country as I watch what is happening around me. I'm just saying that when we talk about Because you swear, when you do things for citizenship, you do things like you swear oaths, right? You make solemn undertakings. For me, I just don't know if I could do it for two places. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. Please.
It's not. We had Jaco, and Jaco has a love of South Africa and a love of Australia. Who did he say he'd follow in the rugby?
South Africa.
I don't blame him.
And I've never met a Kiwi who has then become an Australian who follows Australia in any sport.
No, why would you? All Blacks are one of the world's greatest sporting teams.
But
a symbol of New Zealand culture.
But we talk about about sport. Now, you and I are ingrained in Melbourne sporting culture. I followed Collingwood as a kid, right? It's ingrained. I could never say that I follow your team.
Essendon, for those who are wondering.
But at the same time, when I lived in Brisbane, my second team was Brisbane. But I never didn't follow Collingwood. But I also never became a Brisbane member or bought any Brisbane merchandise or anything because my heart is not in it.
And the analogy is comparable. I tried to get my Italian passport 25 years ago and balls it up royally. The reason I wanted one was so that I could work as a journalist in Italy instead of illegally. And yes, dear listeners, I worked unlawfully as a journalist in Italy in the 90s when you could. I've also worked lawfully in the 90s as a journalist in Hong Kong with a visa and Thailand with a visa, but in Italy, I did not have a visa before internet. But so, we digress a little, but the importance of the second passport is also for business, for taxation, for travel, ease of entry. If you have a Somali passport, you don't want a Somali passport, you want an Australian passport. If you have a Canadian passport, an Australian passport's a nice addition to the collection.
Well, politics impinges on everything.
Sure does.
And it changes over time. And hopefully we are slowly moving away from that period where, for most English-speaking democracies, to come and go freely, you didn't want any kind of country with a Islamic government or Islamic majority passport if you could have a different one. That was just a political condition for all of the sort of Five Eyes kinds of countries.
The Five Eyes countries.
Well,
we could do a separate podcast on them.
Well, they're listening right now, so why don't we say hello? Hello, MI5, MI6.
But overseas absences,
NSA.
Overseas absences, where they do show themselves is, let's use an example of, say, a man who has an industrial business in China, brings his wife and children out, and he will go backwards and forwards to keep his business running. Depending on the visa he's applied for, he might struggle to meet the residence requirements. He might. But overseas absences, as we said, students, people working, citizenship's made for them. You don't get the 3 months holiday. You don't. So the resident requirement can be very easily met. There is, there are discretions, but we won't go into great detail about the discretions.
Well, actually, let's talk about who has the discretion. There's only one person who has the discretion.
The minister has the discretion. He has the discretion for everything.
So if you end up in front of a tribunal, there is no discretion for the chairman of the tribunal or the members of the tribunal. All they can do is send you off to the minister, can't they?
If you're a spouse, a de facto partner, or a surviving spouse, or a de facto partner of an Australian citizen, under Section 22(9) of the Act, there's evidence to demonstrate there's discretion that can be exercised. And the points are, the minister can treat a period as one in which the person was present in Australia as a permanent resident if the person was a spouse or de facto partner of that Australian citizen during that period, and the person was not present in Australia during that period, and the person was a permanent resident during that period, and the minister is satisfied that the person had a close and continuing association with Australia during that period. That's where people fall down, demonstrating a close and continuing relationship with Australia. Having a house is not enough.
Now, can I go through each of those? Absolutely. Because if A, the person was a spouse or de facto partner of an Australian citizen during that period, and B, the person was not present in Australia during that period. So... And,
it's an and. They're all ands.
So, let's link those two first. You are the spouse of an Australian citizen.
Correct.
Now, you
The permanent resident applying for citizenship.
are a permanent resident,
applying for citizenship.
and that ordinarily you would be in Australia.
Correct.
But your spouse is working overseas,
Correct.
maybe in the Defence Force, maybe as a diplomat, maybe as a communication specialist, maybe
doing something.
maybe as a charity worker,
Doing
whatever.
That's right, correct.
You are committed to your Australian spouse, and the reason you are not in Australia is because of the commitment to Australia via your spouse.
That's it, correct.
Okay.
It gets it gets confusing. It gets confusing.
So we link those two. So the next and was the person was a permanent resident during that period.
Correct.
So we've just ticked that one off. Yes, your
Correct.
person. And the minister is satisfied, this is D, that the person had a close and continuing association with Australia. Okay. The close and continuing relationship is that you are married to an Australian who intends to come back and live in Australia, and so do you.
And you have Australian citizenship
Yep.
children at university
Yep.
or adult Australian citizenship children in Australia. You have extended family on Australia, his side, your side. You've been going back from your spouse's employment base to Australia for holidays every time there's a holiday. You've got a property in Australia, you own a flat, you own a rental property.
So let's talk about something that might complicate that. Let's say your partner, who is the Australian citizen.
Yep, working overseas, you're with them, you're a permanent resident.
And what you are doing is furthering your careers offshore without a clear pathway, without a clear trajectory in that career that leads back to being based in Australia.
Well, very often
that makes it muddy, doesn't it?
Well, very often people, the pond becomes too small. So it's not about upskilling to come to a better position in Australia. They've gone as far as they can go in Australia, and they've gone somewhere else where they can climb higher, earn more money. But, that if you own property, if you're paying income tax in Australia, if you're active on let's pull one out of left field. You're actively involved in the community, the Australian expat community in your home country, in your working country. You've got it clear that at the end of your 4-year contract, you are going back to Australia. Your employer knows that. Your employer can show that. You've taken your wife or husband, supporting PR spouse, or your de facto same-sex partner has left their job in Australia to join you because you've gone ahead and paved the way. There's many variables that can be used to demonstrate the close continuing association with Australia. It's not just having Australian citizenship children, it's about extended family. It's a combination of factors, and you've got to base it with evidence. You've got to show declarations from your children, property ownership papers for your property, evidence of income, evidence of intention to reside in Australia, which would be in your emails when you're negotiating the contract. And after this 4-year contract, I intend to return to Australia. Do you get a flavour of it with this talk?
Yeah. What would concern me, because you're talking about property and all those kind of things.
Not necessarily property.
No, but
that is a factor.
Yeah, but
that can be one.
But let me walk through that. If the property we were talking about was not a home that you eventually are planning to move into, if you own 9 flats in Australia, but you also own investment properties in other countries and you hold cash investment assets offshore...
You'd probably live in Monaco.
Well, but you see what I'm saying is you're making decisions that you're perfectly allowed to make. They're
Correct.
not illegal. They're not improper decisions or
Correct.
anything, but they weaken the commitment that you might demonstrate to Australia.
But if you've got a mother who's 97 and she's starting to falter, 10 years a widow since her husband died 10 years ago, that's the time to come back.
But we haven't talked about that. I'm just talking about property. I'm just talking about those kind of investment decisions.
But
because you've made those decisions yourself, you might think that they demonstrate a commitment to Australia, but somebody who is looking at them from a different standpoint might say, no, I don't see that because you invested in 9 flats in Australia that are making you a large turnover, but you are holding cash assets and real estate assets offshore. I don't see a commitment to Australia there.
It's how you argue it. It depends what you do with the rental proceeds.
And like I said, if you owned a house, which is obviously a home you intend to move back to, and that you have not given someone a 10-year lease, those kind of things, well, that shows in favour. What are the kinds of things that would work against you, Dave?
Your movement records. And that's why I always encourage people, when we apply for citizenship for people, we get the movement records to show the in and out, to make sure. Plenty of people have an idea of how much time they've spent in Australia and how much time they spend abroad, but often it can be out by a matter of months, many months. So the movement records can work against you. If you say you've spent X time in Australia and they go, no, you spent Y, then that's going to work against you. Being in a relationship with an Australian and staking your claim on that and that alone is insufficient, usually. It's a combination of factors. Like with a visa application, a citizenship application has a combination of factors. It's the totality of a whole series of pieces. The puzzle is put together completely, you'll succeed. You don't have to have, it's not prescriptive in the sense that you have to have everything. It's not prescriptive. I mean, having Australian citizenship children is lovely, but if you don't have them, it's not the end of the world. A long-term relationship. I've travelled with my husband, my wife, my partner around the world because they're a 5-star chef and they've worked the Hilton hotels around the world. That Australian partner you've been with, doesn't matter that he's worked or she's worked in many different countries. The fact is you follow them around and you're in a long-term relationship with an Australian citizen.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in that idea, David, of the continuing.
I mean, we'll never get
commitment.
into case. We'll never get into case law to argue it because this is not the forum for it.
No. But really, it's that thing where coming and visiting Australia does not demonstrate a commitment. What it demonstrates is a continuing relationship with someone or something in Australia, which is a different emphasis.
But you can move that emphasis and make it a commitment to Australia by showing that you're coming back, that you're renovating Mum's place at 97, that you've employed, God, good Lord, a welfare, what are they called? Support worker. A carer.
That's really the point I was getting to, David, was that it requires slightly more than a visit.
It's about building a framework to return.
That's right. And that's where the commitment shows that you are actually making choices that lead to future decisions and actions. Not that you say, one day I'm going to do this, David. I already have the home that I am going to live in.
Modified my house for Mum, have employed a carer for Mum who has permanent residency, works 5 days a week, has her sister come in on the weekends, a whole network, showing a return to Australia full time.
Or while I have the property in Australia, I have only leased it on 3-year terms so that I know when my return date to live here is, or 12-month terms, or whatever it might be. As you say, it comes back to maths, doesn't it?
Always maths. Yeah. But I'm talking about maths, having bank accounts, and getting back to what you were saying earlier, bank accounts on their own are not enough. They're not enough. Investments are not enough. It's more. It's many ingredients. It's like a minestrone. 20 different ingredients, as many ingredients as possible.
And I would say investments are also only partly indicative. Having a term deposit in a bank in Hong Kong or in Singapore or in London is very different to owning a third share in a restaurant or a printing business in Blackburn. That's
good solid stuff.
Or being an investor in a tourism venture in the north coast of Queensland. That's a commitment where you are putting your dollars and your time and your risk in Australia.
The Australian banker working for ANZ in Hong Kong with his Australian wife, who sends their secondary school age kids back to Geelong Grammar School, Sydney Grammar School, Brisbane Grammar School, to board, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into Australia.
Or for some of us that don't live in that world, David, or who have rented a house for a flat for their secondary school age students in St Albans to go to the amazing selective Suzanne Corey High School or something like that.
Terrific high school. Terrific high school.
People who are perhaps more interested in research than polo.
Great school. I actually have a client who taught there, so it's a fabulous school. Declarations of commitment are not enough either. It's words supported by deeds and actions.
Well, I'm very committed to the Brisbane Football Club, except that I never joined them. I never paid a membership to them, David. I enjoyed the convenience of being able to go and watch them occasionally. Right? That's not commitment.
We should get Andy Gowers on the program to talk about, not just about football in Brisbane, but about financial planning and advice for people who come here, because he's very big in the financial circle these days.
But wouldn't we also like to talk to him about Hawthorn?
Yeah, we could talk to him about Hawthorn as well. Did he win a premiership with Hawthorn or with
of course he
Brisbane?
did.
Both?
Of course he did.
Did he win with both?
Yeah.
And he'd have a lot to say.
For those of you who have no idea about Australian football, Andy Gowers was a wonderful footballer. Contemporaries of ours. Andy was mates of mine, and you obviously know him too, David.
I used to hang out with him on summer holidays a long time ago. Very smart, very savvy businessman, financial operator, financial planner, taxation advisor, and he'd have lots to say. And he'd be a great source for people who are wanting to understand systems, rules and regulations for finance in this country.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't talk to him about his migration journey, David.
Born and bred here. Born and bred. Then when we've touched on some, key points that need to be considered for citizenship, then there are mundane criteria that you've got to have basic English. Well, look at the mundane nitty-gritty. I've only ever heard of people failing the test if they don't have English. That's the reason people will fail the test, because they don't have adequate English. The test assumes rightly or wrongly an adequate knowledge of English to understand the application.
I did see.
And to show that you have an appreciation of, and then here we get all American here, the privileges of being Australian. The privileges.
But
it is a privilege. I tread lightly in jest, but...
Yeah, but I don't think that's unfair to be jesting, because it's only this current government that has put this sort of jingo stuff into citizenship. I think for 50 years, probably from the 70s, I reckon that anybody who chose to become an Australian citizen, I reckon the rest of the community understood that you had made a commitment to be an Australian. But this flag-wavy, jingoistic, for want of a better word, wanky, bloody, hand on the heart sort of rubbish that we see with American nationalism.
We love Americans, but we don't love their nationalism.
But their kind of patriotic bullshit is uniquely American. But for some reason, our latest government has tried to tack onto that, and I don't know why they think that this community wants it.
It's un-Australian,
it's
isn't it?
never been our kind of thing.
That's it. That's true. I've been to a couple of ceremonies for clients who've been unable to have family, and it's a joy to see the emotion and love they have for the country. It's real, and it's not browbeating, hand on chest stuff, hand on heart stuff. You're right. You're right.
And look, what I said before about my own personal thing about committing, I spoke to some people recently who had moved from India, and I was just talking to them about the fact that we had the podcast, and they were interested in that. But I asked them about actually the decision of becoming Australians, right? And so that their identity becomes no longer exclusively Indian, but becoming Australian. And it was so obvious, the passion and the desire to be Australian,
absolutely,
and to be accepted as Australians. It was so obvious. It was palpable. I could feel it as they were saying the words. I could feel it hit me in the face.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And those of you, if any of you have friends who are permanent residents and they invite you to a citizenship ceremony, go and enjoy and realise how lucky we are to have your friends who want to be citizens here, and how beautiful it is to be part of Australia.
And for those of us who were growing up in the 70s and, maturing in the 80s and the 90s, God, Australia's a much better place than it was back then.
Oh, absolutely.
The only proviso I would have is that we're destroying our environment day by day, but the migrants aren't doing that.
No.
The property developers, all the Tristans and Sinjans at Melbourne Grammar and whatnot are doing that.
I don't think we've never had a property developer on the program. We never will.
Well,
we never will.
But look, I'm unfair, really. But the point being, Australia's a much better place for all the things that the Irish brought with them, the Italians brought with them, the Greeks
Turkish,
brought with them,
the Indians, Polish, Russians.
That's right, the Eastern Europeans, the Cambodians, the Thai.
Zimbabweans, South Africans, the Angolans. I was in an Uber. I worked very late the other night, and as you know, I don't have a car. So I got an Uber home, and I was looking at this guy, and I thought, I asked him a few things and asked him his name, and I said, "You got to be from Angola." And he nearly crashed the Uber. He was so excited. He said, "First Australian to ever work out where I was from." And his story was fascinating. And his love for Australia, as you said, palpable. Instead of relaxing and getting out of the car sedate, I got out of the car excited, invigorated. It was 12:30 in the morning. I thought, this is what it is to be Australian. This guy is doing 12, 14 hours a day to support his wife, and his kids are at school. And the sacrifices that migrants make to come here and to continue to live here.
Well, we talk about that all the time, and studying here and raising families while they're studying.
The hard work and the desire. We don't realise how lucky we are to be Australian until we encounter people like that.
You know, the other thing I love, David, the other thing I absolutely love is that a lot of these people, and we talk about the tragic history of other countries and horrible situations people leave, but a lot of these people are now professional, experienced, educated people who have watched another country completely mess it up. Right? So there's all these lessons that we can learn without having to actually have the first-hand lessons to learn, if
Correct.
you know what I mean.
Correct.
And our collective wisdom as a community is so much greater than being a monoculture who only sings bush ballads about bloody swagmen and bushrangers.
I don't like damper. Do you like damper? Damper's revolting.
But damper's good if you put jam and cream on it.
That's a vehicle for... It's merely a vehicle for
or
jam and cream.
soaking up gravy.
No.
I don't mind it if I've made a fantastic stew or something and I want to wipe the plate down and get every last skerrick of gravy.
In primary school, we cooked damper or baked damper all the time. And it was just awful. I just thought, thank God we've got some Italian food, Chinese food. We used to have Sunday Italian lunch at Leo's and down in St Kilda. Beautiful Italian establishment, part of the culture.
David, if you're from the Philippines and you know pandesal, or if you've had a beautiful Devonshire tea with amazing scones,
Very rare, but a novelty.
or got up and walked past an amazing Vietnamese bakery in the morning and you can just smell those beautiful rolls.
Fantastic.
Damper is nothing that those things are.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But and that is often the way a lot of Australians are first exposed to other cultures is by local migrants, people who've migrated, and their food. And the food.
Yeah.
How lucky are we to have the culture? Italy doesn't have that diversity.
No, and
The United States has that diversity. The United Kingdom doesn't really have that diversity that we have in the United States and Canada have.
it's the strength of Australia.
It's multiculturalism.
It's the strength of
Absolutely.
Australia.
Absolutely. The other thing
Imagine if we were all pasty, short, poorly
Well, that's all you need to do is look at a photo of Australia 100 years ago.
That's right.
And that's what not now. The only thing we haven't picked up through multiculturalism is a second language, which is a real shame. It's a real shame. Languages are taught terribly in this country, and we have effectively one language. And that's the only thing that we haven't embraced from...
And even that is misnamed.
Oh,
English.
We don't open our mouths when we talk. We don't articulate. A lot of people I talk to prefer American English because they open their mouths when they talk, whereas we don't.
I did just want to mention, David, that if you want to try and strengthen your Australian, there's apps like Skritter where you can just chat in language. So, like, if I want to talk to native Japanese speakers...
You'll speak in English, they'll translate into Japanese.
Well, I go and you go there with the intention of helping people speak a language they don't really know.
Yeah.
So
I do that with Tandem for my Portuguese and Spanish.
Yeah, well, it's very similar. So I just wanted to say, if you're listening and wondering how you can practice before you come here, there are heaps of apps that you can do it, and the community is tolerant because that's the whole point of the app. The whole point of the app isn't to be like a social media app where people expect you to know what you're talking about in language. People will...
If you want to develop an ear for Australian English, Australian movies are not enough, Australian TV is not enough. You need...
The Migrating to Australian podcast is probably enough.
I think we've had enough today.
Well, look, are there any other sort of must-knows about the citizenship, David? We've had a lot of fun with it. You have to know your dates very clearly.
You've got to know your dates and that mundane stuff. Taking the test, applying for the application, applying for citizenship, taking the test, attending the ceremony. Assume a basic level of English. If you don't understand the questions in the test because you can't read English, you'll struggle to pass. You've got to be of good character, and if you've got PR, you've already established you've got good character, unless you've been naughty on PR. Being of good character, if you've got PR and you behave yourself, you'll meet that requirement of good character for citizenship, not a problem. Don't, when you've got PR, as we were talking about dates, the associated point with dates is spend as much time as possible here. If you want to go for a holiday between lodgement of your citizenship and the ceremony itself, at the moment, you put an application for citizenship in, the ceremony and the certificate are about 2 years away, roughly 2 years. You can go for a holiday then, but you don't relocate to another country. You can go for a holiday. You want to show that you're likely to reside in Australia, continue to, you've got a house in Australia, you've got an apartment in Australia, you've got a job in Australia, you've got kids who are growing up in Australia and you live with them or they live with you. There's a whole host of ingredients.
But you haven't given a 30-year lease on the property. You need to be able to back up.
And at risk of repeating myself, people listening here locally, if your PR friends invite you to a citizenship ceremony, you must. They're beautiful.
Citizenship
ceremony. I sound like I'm struggling to say those words. Citizenship ceremony. It's a beautiful thing, and the kids' choir that sings is fantastic. You'll see who your local member is. No, I was like, oh, is that who that man is? At state or federal level, no one knows who their local members are. Beautiful ceremony, and the Australian passport you can apply for shortly thereafter.
Yep. And I just want to say one more thing about that ministerial discretion, which is how you can have a bash at a second go if you get knocked back.
Well, if you get knocked back, you can wait and satisfy the general residence requirement, or you can apply again and seek ministerial discretion.
But ministerial discretion is not what you might think. It is not the minister can decide to do whatever he bloody well wants. There are pretty strict guidelines of what the minister can consider for reasons for discretion. So let's wrap it up in 2 minutes, what we've taken an hour to say. You need to understand clearly what the requirements for residency and actual occupancy, for want of a
better term, occupancy.
Being in Australia.
4 years in Australia.
Having your feet planted on the
first 3 years
terra
can be temporary residency or permanent residency. The fourth year before you apply, must be permanent residency. The first 3 years, no more than 275 days outside Australia. 276, start again.
Know how to operate your calculator.
No more than 90 days in the fourth year. Request for movement records from the Department of Home Affairs website. Request movement records. Get your maths right. and go for the test. Now, the test, it's a booklet and it's published in multiple languages. They tell you what to read, what not to read, what you have to read, what you don't have to read, and practice test. Do practice tests.
And reach out to me for the trivia. So you want to be an Australian.
It's nothing like the infamous American test, which is apparently very complex, comparatively speaking.
Yeah. I don't even want to talk about American citizenship at all.
And the prize after the citizenship certificate is an Australian passport. You apply for your passport. You've got 2 passports. But remember, if you're from Singapore, you can't be a dual citizen. If you're from Malaysia, you can't be a dual citizen. People will be listening going, yes, but I am. Well, you're naughty for not telling your home country.
And at some stage, you will get caught.
Oh, ultimately, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then, I don't know, but I don't know what the severity is for doing it, but you might end up in a prison cell meeting.
Australia doesn't care so much as the home country. I wouldn't want to break any law in Singapore, Malaysia, Japan or South Korea. I'd want to respect their laws. And if they say citizens cannot apply, I wouldn't be if I was a Japanese, South Korean, Singaporean or Malaysian citizen.
I feel like I have to rephrase that, David. You being an immigration lawyer, I think that sentence should have been, I would not want to break any law.
What did I say?
I would not want to break any law in Japan or...
Well, I used to be a criminal lawyer. But no, the story is that they do know. A mate of mine went back to Israel and he entered Israel on his Australian passport and Border Patrol said, where's your Israeli passport?
Yeah.
Pulled it out of his pocket. They know.
And, look, data matching. Hey, data matching. Everywhere, everything, everywhere.
And there are also rules. While we're talking generally here, there are rules about how old you are before you can cease to become a dual citizen in Malaysia and Singapore. There are rules about people who are younger. We've got buzzing. Can you hear buzzing?
Yeah, I think you've got a phone ringing.
Lots
Dave.
of surprises in the Migrating to Australia podcast. But the story is that you can't break the rules of your home country. Australia doesn't really care that much. If you apply for Australian passport and you're eligible and you satisfy the criteria, you'll get it. Whether it's something you want, well, I've been to citizenship ceremonies and I know people want it because it's the ultimate piece of evidence that you're an Australian, the blue and gold passport. With a microchip. I got a new passport. I hadn't had one for 12 years. Went overseas for my 50th a couple of years back. It's got a microchip in it.
Oh, bear with me, fellow audience members. These morons with their 5G rubbish. Did you see the story? There's this jewellery that you can buy that protects you from 5G. I think the consumer protection people in Holland, I think it is, tested them. The things are radioactive. They're damaging for your health, but they're being marketed as protecting you from 5G.
Unbelievable.
I just had to bring that up when you mentioned microchips, David, because of course I recently got my booster shot, so I'm just filled with microchips. They're flying around my system, and Bill Gates is tracking every movement I make.
I've got mine next week. So how are you feeling?
Oh, good. I didn't have any dramas with it. So, and God, it looks like we're going to have to be getting another booster in a matter of months the way things are going. But anyway, let's not bring it down. It's the end of the year. If someone needs to speak to you urgently for migration stuff, David?
Direct message on Twitter. We'll get in real time, same day, and probably reply same day to tee up an appointment. Twitter handle is at David Bongiorno, all one word, DavidBongiorno. And Twitter is the best way to contact me. Some people contact me through Instagram. And Grant, if you want to share with the audience my Instagram handle.
At David_A_C_Bongiorno.
Came very late to Instagram. Way too late. There are about 30 David Bongiornos before I got there.
Now, we did say this was the last show for
2021,
the year, which is probably correct. But there is one that we've already recorded that will probably come out after the end of the year. But hey, season's greetings, David.
So Buon Natale a tutti. Have a lovely Christmas, everyone. A lovely holiday season. Happy Hanukkah. Happy holidays. Happy Christmas.
Enjoy the break. If you've been studying this year with the amazing, the last 2 years, the amazing dramas.
Here, well done. It's incredibly hard. To do it in a second language is even harder, so well done. And people who've stayed and done everything they can to survive. We love you guys at Migrating to Australia podcast. International students, young graduates are the lifeblood of the country, and the more of you that come, the better as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, I don't want to... look, everyone's been hero worshipping the health workers, and they bloody deserve it. But if you are one of the health workers who has recently come in from overseas to help out, bloody good on you. But,
bless you in there, seriously.
But please go back and help your people if they continue to need help, because I reckon we're over the crest, but there's an awful lot of the world that is a long way away from being in the position we are. So, yeah, let's hope everyone is COVID normal next year.
Hope indeed. Have a good one. Have a good break.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.